You hear them before you see them. A sound like distant thunder rolling across the Afghan valley, except the sky is cloudless and blue. Then you understand its hooves, tens of thousands of them, drumming the earth in perfect rhythm. You're standing in a formation of dismounted cavalry, your horse tethered somewhere behind the lines, and you're thinking about the pyramids of skulls you saw at Nish. Children's heads stacked separately from their mothers. The Mongols built those pyramids methodically, organized by gender and age, as if cataloging livestock. Now they're coming for you. Your prince has ordered something that feels like suicide. Climb down from your horses, lock shields, and stand. Just stand. Against warriors who have never lost. Before we dive deeper into this impossible moment, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching this from? It's absolutely wild to me that a battle fought in an Afghan mountain pass 800 years ago can reach screens across every continent today. The year is 1221, and the Khwarazmian Empire does not merely fall, it vanishes. 18 months earlier, it was the richest realm between Constantinople and China. Samarkand, with 400,000 people, Bukhara, a beacon of Islamic scholarship, and Merv, perhaps the world's largest city, 1 million lives behind towering walls, now erased. Then a trade caravan arrived from Mongolia, a peaceful gesture from Genghis Khan, 450 merchants carrying silk and silver, proposing commerce instead of war. The governor of Otra, a man named Inalhuk, had them all executed. Roughly 150 men murdered for the crime of bringing gifts. When Genghis Khan sent ambassadors to demand explanation, Shah Muhammad II of Khwarazm made the worst decision in military history. He had the lead ambassador killed and sent the others back with their beards burned off. Genghis Khan's response wasn't war. It was extermination dressed in military tactics. The Mongol armies that entered Khwarazmian territory in 1219 moved like a coordinated organism. Despite being separated by hundreds of miles of desert, they besieged 4 major cities simultaneously, something that should have been logistically impossible. Samarkand, with its 400,000 people and reputation for impregnability, fell in 5 days. The Mongols killed every single inhabitant except for 30,000 artisans they selected for slavery. When Bukhara surrendered, hoping for mercy, the Mongols herded the entire population onto the surrounding steppes and executed them in organized waves. They burned the libraries. Centuries of accumulated wisdom turned to ash in an afternoon. But Reshaped was where the Mongols revealed the true depths of their capacity for methodical horror. During the siege, a Mongol prince died from a defender's arrow. When the city finally fell, Genghis Khan ordered complete annihilation. Not just the garrison, not just the men, everything that breathed. The Mongols spent 6 full days killing. They worked section by section, street by street, building by building. When they finished, they constructed pyramids from the severed heads, organizing them by category: men's skulls, women's skulls, children's skulls. Contemporary chroniclers claimed 1.7 million died, though modern historians estimate around 200,000. Either number represents something beyond massacre. It's architectural murder, genocide as a construction project. By spring 1221, the Khwarazmian Empire had been reduced to memory and mass graves. Shah Muhammad II, who had endorsed the execution of Genghis Khan's ambassadors, died on a desolate Caspian island, having literally run himself to death, fleeing from city to city in psychological collapse. He left behind one son who refused to run. Jalal al-Din Ming-Bernu was roughly 30 years old, trained in warfare since childhood, and now commanding an army that shouldn't exist. The 30,000 men gathered under his banner weren't professional soldiers, they were survivors. Refugees who'd watched their families murdered, warriors who'd escaped city massacres by hiding among corpses, men who had nothing left except the knowledge that the Mongols killed everyone anyway, so dying in battle at least offered the dignity of facing your executioner. Jalal al-Din led them toward the mountain passes of Afghanistan, hoping terrain might matter more than numbers. And that's when he made a decision that violated every principle of cavalry warfare that had been established over millennia of human conflict. The Mongol force pursuing him was commanded by Shigi Kutuk, one of Genghis Khan's adopted sons, leading roughly 30,000 elite horse archers. These weren't ordinary soldiers, Mongol warriors trained from before they could walk, learning to shoot composite bows from horseback while riding at full gallop. Each warrior maintained 4 or 5 horses, rotating between them to cover 100 miles in a single day. Their tactics had evolved over decades of continuous warfare into something that seemed mathematically impossible to defeat. They advanced in loose lines just beyond enemy range, unleashing storms of arrows, 15 to 20 shots per archer each minute, hundreds of thousands in moments. The thunder of bowstrings shattered resolve. Fortified foes were starved, pursuers lured into ambush, and any who tried matching Mongol speed were driven to exhaustion and annihilated. Every army that had faced them, Chinese, Persian, Turkish, Russian, had failed. The Mongols had never lost a major field battle in the 20 years since Genghis Khan unified the steppe tribes. But Jalal al-Din had observed something in the pattern of their victories. The Mongols always won through mobility and range. They never committed to prolonged close combat if they could avoid it. Their power came from shooting and maneuvering simultaneously, from controlling the distance of engagement, from forcing enemies to fight at the range where Mongol composite bows were devastating and enemy weapons useless. So when his scouts reported the Mongol army approaching through the Parwan Valley, Jalal al-Din positioned his forces with the mountains at his back, eliminating any possibility of retreat, and then issued orders that must have sounded like madness. He commanded his cavalry to dismount. 20,000 horsemen trained their entire lives to fight from horseback, climbed down, and formed up as foot archers and infantry. They locked shields, creating dense formations with archers behind them in organized ranks. Only 10,000 cavalry remained mounted, positioned on the flanks, and ordered not to move under any circumstances until Jalal al-Din personally gave the signal. The dismounted men were transformed into a human fortress, immobile, concentrated, vulnerable to being surrounded, but capable of something cavalry could never achieve: sustained, accurate, disciplined archery fire without worrying about controlling terrified horses under arrow storms. When Shigi Kutuk arrived and saw this formation, he must have experienced a moment of genuine confusion. In 2 decades of Mongol expansion, no enemy commander had ever deliberately surrendered mobility. Every opponent had either tried to match Mongol speed or hidden behind city walls. This was something new, something that didn't fit Mongol tactical doctrine. The battle opened with the traditional Mongol approach. Light cavalry advanced in waves, composite bows, singing, launching volleys, designed to break enemy psychology through sheer overwhelming volume. The arrows came in clouds, so dense they literally darkened the sun. Survivors described the sound as apocalyptic, a continuous roar like standing inside a waterfall made of wood and steel against cavalry formations. This tactic was devastating because horses panic. They rear, they bolt, they break ranks, and once formation collapses, the massacre begins. Against infantry and cities, the Mongols would simply exhaust defenders, shooting for hours until resistance dissolved. But Jalal ad-Din's dismounted cavalry were different. These were professional warriors who had already survived the destruction of their entire civilization. They had watched cities burn. They had walked past pyramids built from the heads of children. They had nothing left to fear because the worst had already happened. They locked shields, absorbed the arrow storm, and held formation. More crucially, because they were on foot and didn't need to control panicking horses, they could shoot back with accurate, sustained, disciplined fire. A mounted archer shoots while moving, compensating for horse movement, making long-range accuracy difficult. A foot archer stands stable, plants his feet, aims carefully, controls his breathing, and shoots methodically. The difference in accuracy is enormous. Jalal ad-Din's men began returning fire in organized volleys. And for the first time in Mongol experience, their signature tactic wasn't working. The enemy formation wasn't breaking. Men were dying. Yes, arrows were finding gaps in shields, but the survivors closed ranks immediately and kept shooting. The line held. Shigi Kutuk tried the feigned retreat, pulling back cavalry units to draw the enemy into pursuit. This tactic had worked countless times. Enemies would break formation to chase what they thought were fleeing Mongols, stretching out into pursuit columns, and then the real Mongol force would emerge from hiding and destroy them. But Jalal ad-Din had explicitly ordered his men not to move under any circumstances. The dismounted troops stayed in formation, shooting at any Mongols who came within range. They refused the bait. They wouldn't chase. They just stood there, a bristling wall of shields and arrows that wouldn't break and couldn't be drawn into mistakes. This was completely outside Mongol tactical vocabulary. Their entire system of warfare assumed enemies would eventually break either from fear or exhaustion or tactical error. Jalal ad-Din's army was doing none of those things. Hours passed. The sun climbed to its zenith and began descending toward the western peaks. Both armies were locked in grinding attrition, trading arrow fire across killing ground neither could cross. The Mongols kept shooting until something unprecedented happened. They began running low on arrows. This almost never occurred because battles usually ended long before ammunition was depleted. Shigi Kutuk tried direct cavalry charges, sending warriors at full gallop toward the Khwarazmian lines. But dense formations of locked shields and accurate fire from stationary. Archers cut down horses and riders before they could make contact. The charges broke like waves against cliffs. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the valley and both armies approached exhaustion, Jalal ad-Din saw his moment. The Mongols had committed fully to breaking his center, concentrating their forces in repeated charges against the immobile formation. This intensity had stretched their flanks thin. Their cavalry, exhausted from hours of shooting and charging, had lost their perfect spacing and coordination. Jalal ad-Din signaled his 10,000 mounted cavalry who had been waiting on the wings through the entire battle. These men were fresh, their horses were rested, and they had watched their dismounted comrades hold against impossible odds for hours, proving the unbeatable Mongols could be stopped. When they charged, they hit the Mongol flanks like hammers striking glass. The Mongols, exhausted and depleted of arrows, suddenly found themselves caught between the anvil of immobile infantry in front and cavalry crashing into their sides. Their formations, so perfect and coordinated at the battle's start, shattered. Warriors who had never experienced defeat suddenly panicked. They tried to disengage, to regroup, to execute the tactical flexibility that had saved them in every previous battle. But Jalal ad-Din's cavalry gave them no space. The pursuit became slaughter. Thousands of Mongol warriors, elite soldiers who had conquered empires, who had destroyed armies 5 times their size, died running through mountain passes, cut down from behind or trampled by their own retreating comrades. The casualty figures tell the story. Contemporary sources claim the entire Mongol army was destroyed, though this is likely exaggeration born from shock that Mongols could be beaten at all. Modern historians estimate 10,000 to 15,000 Mongol warriors were killed, captured, or scattered. Shigi Kutuk himself barely escaped with perhaps a quarter of his original force. For context, the Mongols had lost fewer men conquering the entire Khwarazmian Empire, razing dozens of cities, slaughtering millions of people than they lost in this single afternoon. Jalal al-Din's losses were also severe, probably 5,000 to 8,000 dead. But these were losses he could sustain because he had won. The tactic had worked. By sacrificing mobility, by creating an immobile fortress of disciplined archery, he had negated the Mongol advantage. The foot archers shot more accurately and sustained fire longer than mounted archers. The dense infantry formation couldn't be broken by arrows alone, and when the Mongols exhausted themselves trying to crack this defense, they became vulnerable to the cavalry counterattack. It was brilliant. It was unprecedented. News of the victory spread across the Islamic world like fire across dry grass. For the first time since the Mongol invasions began, someone had defeated them in open battle. Cities that had been preparing to surrender suddenly found courage. Soldiers who had been deserting rallied to Jalal al-Din's banner. Within weeks, his army swelled to 70,000 men. If Jalal al-Din could consolidate this force, if he could train more troops in his dismounted archer tactics, he might actually rebuild the Khwarazmian Empire and drive the Mongols back across the steppes. The formula existed now. Other commanders could learn it. The Mongols were beatable. But Jalal al-Din had made one catastrophic miscalculation. He had defeated a Mongol army. He had not defeated Genghis Khan. When word reached the great Khan that Shigi Kutuk had been beaten, the response was immediate and absolute. Genghis Khan would personally hunt down Jalal al-Din and erase him from existence. The Khan arrived with 50,000 of his most elite warriors and began systematically destroying Jalal al-Din's support base. Every city that had rallied to the prince was besieged and annihilated. Every tribe that had sent him soldiers was tracked down and massacred. The Mongols moved with terrifying speed, appearing at cities before defenders could prepare. Genghis Khan had studied the Battle of Parwan, understood exactly what had happened, and adjusted his tactics. He refused to engage Jalal al-Din on disadvantageous terms. He sent scouts to track every movement, harassed supply lines, and waited for the perfect moment. That moment came at the Indus River in late 1221. Jalal al-Din's army, reduced to 30,000 men through attrition and desertion, found itself trapped with the river at their back and Genghis Khan's full force approaching. Jalal al-Din tried to form his dismounted archer formation again, but this time Genghis Khan didn't engage the center at all. The Mongols swept around both flanks with overwhelming numbers, encircling the entire Khwarazmian army. The dismounted archers, immobile by design, couldn't reposition quickly enough to face threats from multiple directions. Within hours, the formation collapsed into chaos. Warriors tried to flee across the Indus, but the current was swift and many drowned, dragged down by armor. The Mongols methodically slaughtered those who remained on the bank, but Genghis Khan wanted Jalal al-Din himself. The Mongol cavalry pursued the prince to the river's edge, where Jalal al-Din, surrounded by dozens of warriors with the raging Indus behind him, made his final choice. He spurred his horse and leaped off a cliff into the river below, still wearing full armor, still carrying his weapons. The leap was suicidal. The Indus at that point ran through a gorge with cliffs 30 to 40 feet high. Men in armor who jumped into rivers drowned within seconds. But Jalal al-Din somehow swam, somehow crossed, somehow dragged himself onto the opposite bank. Mongol archers shot continuously, arrows splashing around him, but none found their mark. When Jalal al-Din finally reached the far shore and looked back, Genghis Khan himself stood on the cliff edge, watching. According to chroniclers, the great Khan turned to his sons and said, "A son should be like that," acknowledging his enemy's courage, even as he vowed to eventually kill him. Jalal al-Din spent the next 10 years as a fugitive, wandering from court to court, trying to raise new armies. He never again achieved anything close to the victory at Parwan. The Mongols tracked him down in 1231 and killed him in a minor skirmish in Kurdistan. His dismounted archer tactics died with him, lost to history. The tragedy of Parwan is that it proved defeating the Mongols was possible. Jalal al-Din had discovered a tactical solution that worked. Dismounted archers in disciplined formations could counter Mongol mobility. Dense infantry could absorb arrow storms. Cavalry held in reserve could exploit Mongol exhaustion. The tactics were sound, proven in battle against elite forces, but Jalal al-Din never got the chance to systematize his approach. He never built an institutional military structure that could teach these tactics to other armies. He never wrote a manual or trained commanders who could spread his methods. When he died, the knowledge died with him. Other commanders who later faced the Mongols, like the Mamluks at Angelut in 1260, would use similar principles. But they developed these methods independently, rediscovering what Jalal al-Din had already proven. Perhaps the most brutal irony is that Jalal al-Din's greatest victory sealed his fate. If he had simply fled after the empire fell, accepted exile in India or Syria, he might have lived a long life as an honored refugee prince. Instead, he chose to resist, achieve the impossible, and thereby guaranteed that Genghis Khan would hunt him relentlessly until he was dead. Because the Mongol Empire was built on the terror of invincibility. Every city that might resist, every army that might fight, every Khan who might rebel, all took courage from the idea that Mongol victory was inevitable. Jalal al-Din proved it wasn't inevitable. For that, he had to be destroyed completely, his victory buried, his tactics forgotten. The 30,000-foot archers who slaughtered the invincible Mongols at Parwan became a historical footnote. Genghis Khan made sure history would remember not Jalal al-Din's impossible stand, but his desperate flight and ultimate death. The pyramids of skulls endured in historical memory. The day the Mongols lost was erased. Somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, there's a valley where the grass once turned red for an entire afternoon, where foot archers proved that even the unstoppable could be stopped if only someone was brave enough or desperate enough to try something impossible. The wind still blows through those passes. The mountains remember, even if history chose to forget.